They offered me to leave for Venezuela. There were good relations there. There were people there. So they needed my helping hand again. So I did. I went to Venezuela and, indeed, the connections went to the highest levels there in Venezuela.
Fernando Blenquio Cesena says that his longtime employers in Sinaloa, the executives of a massive multinational corporation that contracts with thousands of people from all walks of life, including both elected and appointed government officials in states across the globe, brought him out of his semi-retirement in England and sent him to Venezuela to oversee air shipping logistics for their company. Blenquio says that his friends in Sinaloa successfully negotiated a lucrative business partnership with the Fox administration of Mexico and the Chavez administration of Venezuela to move industrial quantities of cocaine and other illicit commodities from Venezuela to Mexico. But before he could make his move, however, he'd need a new identity. Fernando Blenquio Cesena had been compromised after the arrest and collaboration of his former business partner and kidnapper, Steve. So Blenquio decided to make a trip to Chavinda, Michoacan, and purchase a new identity.
I had a plan that gives me peace of mind. In this case, I head to Michoacan. I had good friends there. Chavinda. I use it as a place of birth and I produce a birth certificate. Well, I ask for it, but an authentic one, a legally valid document. So I have a Raúl Jiménez Alfaro, born in Chavinda, Michoacan.
Blenquio refers to Chavinda as a tiny little town where the civil registry has not yet been digitized, and thus a place where he can oversee that his new birth certificate is properly deposited in the original files. Blenquio used the story of rural, undocumented migrants dying tragically in the U.S. to explain Raúl's lack of living relatives and his parents' lack of documentation.
I also get Raúl registered to vote and obtain his voting license, which is used as an official ID in Mexico. What's the story? Well, the story is that he's the son of undocumented immigrants who die on this side of the border, and he becomes an orphan. Raulito learns. He learns to fly, he learns English, he learns everything there is to know about aviation.
Blenquio also purchased Raúl's pilot's license, his duly registered bank accounts, and set up his airplane business, first in Guadalajara and later in the coastal resort town of Huatulco. Raúl Jiménez Alfaro then began to make his first business trips.
So, setting up my business, I began to take my first trips to Venezuela to build relationships with the individuals who'd been recommended to me. I make my evaluations, study the area, the possibilities, and begin my first jobs.
He says that he went to meet his Colombian suppliers and his Venezuelan business partners, whom he described as the National Guard, politicians, etc. His job was, he said, to check things out, organize and set everything up, and get to work, coordinating 2 weekly drug flights from Maiquetía International Airport in Caracas to Toluca International Airport in Mexico. Though first, they needed a new plane.
We buy a Merlin 3C, which is a plane that has the self-sufficiency to make the Venezuela-Mexico route without layovers, a turboprop.
And then they got to work. During his interviews with Fernando Blenquio Cesena, reporter Menyo Larios asked him point blank, "Do you consider yourself a pilot or a drug trafficker?" Blenquio responded,
Piloto, 100% piloto, profesional. El narcotráfico se los dejo a las falacias gubernamentales. Yo soy transportista, eso es lo que soy. Un piloto transportista.
Which loosely translated, means I'm 100% a professional pilot. I leave drug trafficking to the government fallacies. I am a cargo shipper, that's what I am, a cargo pilot. Menyo took Blenquio's adamant self-identification here as a transportista, or cargo pilot, as the title of the podcast that he and Detective produce. And there really is no doubt that Fernando Blenquio Cesena is in fact a transportista, a professional cargo pilot with decades of experience flying both licit and illicit cargo. That said, Blenquio wasn't just a pilot. During the next part of his story, in fact, Blenquio himself supplies the testimony to his participation in what we might call his side hustles. My name, somehow, is still John Gibler, and this, in a sense, is Transportista. Episode 8, Traficante. Once he was set up with a new plane, Blenquio, acting as Raul Jimenez Alfaro, started dabbling in both drug trafficking and human smuggling from Venezuela to Mexico.
With that plane, I start to get a little mischievous, so to say, to sporting Chinese people. I would get paid $12,000 per head. And I would pay, if my memory serves me well, $4,000 per head, with everything fixed at the Mexican airports.
He paid another $1,500 per person to authorities at the Venezuelan airport, and thus, with not exactly precise math, he said,
$500 to get out. So, a total of $6,000 of net profit were left for me. It cost me $6,000 and I kept $6,000. So, it was a profitable business, right?
If Blenquio paid $12,000 per migrant just to fly them from Venezuela to Mexico, imagine what each person would have had to pay for their entire trip. This is, of course, assuming that these were in fact undocumented migrants and not victims of human trafficking. But that wasn't all that Blenquio took on those flights.
In the plane's nose, I would stuff 200 kilos of drugs, which I discreetly loaded, so to say. And when I arrived, say to Cancun, I would end my international flight plan. They were happy with the undocumented immigrant business, and I would embark on a domestic flight from Cancun to Guadalajara to my hangars and calmly unload my 200 kilos, which was extremely profitable.
Blenquio says here that the 200 kilos were his. They, along with the human smuggling activities, were his side hustles, it seems. And thus, in addition to being a transportista, it seems he was also a bit of a traficante. According to his own telling, he was able to keep this up and profit handsomely for some 3 years, from 2003 to 2006. Blenquio describes this time wistfully.
By that time in Venezuela, I had control, so to say. We'd successfully completed several vueltas in the Learjets. I had bought 3 of them at the time. Even a Lear 36, the most capable one, which I used as a personal plane, I would come down with our own money. I stuffed up to $10 million in a secret compartment. The National Guard was our personal guard. We had all the comforts and conveniences. We had the world at our feet. We were working more than ever, with unexpected conveniences in every sense of the word, both in Mexico and in Venezuela. We had projects in Nicaragua, business in Panama, a company in El Salvador. We were expanding. those were the best moments in air transport for Raúl Jiménez, because he was the businessman, Raúl Jiménez Alfaro.
In the throes of such fond nostalgia, here once again, he refers to his relationships with women as if they were just one more luxury commodity available to him through his money and power. He says that after living in England with his wife, when he returned to his drug trafficking activities in Venezuela, inherent to them, he said, quote, are the ladies, end quote. He then proceeds to brag about how literally, quote, barbarous, end quote, it was to be, quote, in the thick of so many Venezuelan and so many Colombian women, end quote. Here's what he said.
Cuando, digamos que reinicio actividades de narcotráfico, pues inherente a ellos son las damas, ¿verdad? Y pues qué bárbaro. Había pues, llega la mera mata, por así decirlo, de tanto venezolanas como colombianas. Qué bárbaro. Ahora sí que así, de ese tamaño, qué bárbaro.
I include this here because I think it is essential to notice how a lifelong, mid-level, male participant in the business describes so proudly the systematic exploitation of women as an inherent feature of the global drug trafficking and drug war industries. Blenquio describes his happy memories of driving around Caracas in a luxury BMW with the Venezuelan National Guard as his personal security detail, sporting collector's edition jeweled watches, and, he says, quote, being with so many women, end quote. He brags about being with Miss Venezuela and Miss Germany, all while his wife and child wait for him in England. Miss Germany, in fact, plays a part in how he tells the story of the infamous Cocaine One.
I, king of the world and a huge soccer fan, was in the process of buying a Falcon 50 to fly directly to Germany and enjoy the World Cup with my friends.
A Falcon 50, capable of crossing the Atlantic on direct flights, was then valued at around $15 million, Blenquio says. With business booming and feeling himself to be king of the world, Blenquio wanted to take a vacation.
Having a German girlfriend and Miss Germany and the World Cup just around the corner, I decided to cease operations starting February 2006, so that nothing could get in the way of my World Cup dream.
So, in his own telling, Blenquio was getting everything ready to go on vacation in Germany for the 2006 World Cup. Then, one of his Colombian business partners, he says, started pestering him to make one more little trip before closing the shop.
One of the partners, Frank El Negro, who called me Chucky or Chuquisito, insisted on doing a vuelta. We have merchandise lying around, ready. Little Chucky, Chuquisito.
Luis Frank Tello Candelo, whom Blenquio refers to as El Negro Frank, is a Colombian drug trafficker with whom Blenquio says he worked during his self-described golden years in Venezuela. Tello is now in prison in the United States. Blenquio says that Tello kept after him.
So, he keeps insisting and talks me into it. And I decide to send that plane to Mexico with 5 tons.
That plane, of course, is the DC-9 busted in Campeche.
The worst mistake in my life, not being faithful to my plans, to the first choice that was not doing anything until after the World Cup. And that's how it all ended up, in the worst catastrophe in the history of my aerial operations.
Next time. Transportista is a Detective production with Exile Content Studio in partnership with iHeartRadio's My Cultura podcast network. Directed and narrated by John Gibler. Transportista's voice by Joaquin Cosillo. Editing and sound design by Fernando de la Rosa and Pedro G. Garcia. Reporting by John Gibler and Menio Larios. Produced by Julio Gonzalez. Voice recording by Hugo Merino and Rene Garcia. Transportistas interviews translated by Carla Ruiz Argaiz. Production supervision by Nando Vila and Alvaro Céspedes. Associate producers Alonso Aguilar and Alejandro Duran. Diego Enrique Osorno is the creator and executive producer along with Daniel Eilenberg and Isaac Lee. Executive producers for iHeartMedia are Connell Byrne and Giselle Bunces. For more podcasts from iHeart, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.